Well, hello everybody, and welcome to another piano video here at the Merriam Pianos YouTube channel. My name is Stu Harrison, and today we are comparing the Kawai CA99 and the NV5/NV5S. This is a common comparison and a source of a lot of questions online because there are so many similarities between these two instruments, and the differences are few but critical. So we've got them side by side, and we are going to play them back and forth and share with you what we consider the few but critical salient differences between these two instruments, and hopefully help your research along and bring you to a decision on what might be a better fit for you, the CA99 or the NV5. If it is the first time that you're joining us here on the YouTube channel, we would really appreciate, either now or at the end of the video, hit that subscribe and the notification bell so that you are back with us for future videos, because we'd love to have you commenting, or even if you don't feel like commenting, at least watching and sharing and enjoying what we're all doing here with the world of pianos. So without further ado, let's get started with this comparison of the CA99 and the Novus 5 right away. So as we said in the intro, CA99 versus the NV5. There aren't too many models within the same company's lineup that get compared as often as the CA99 and the NV5. It makes sense to me. Both are not cheap. These are right at the top of Kawai's lineup, and in comparison to Yamaha's lineup, Roland lineup, they're right at the very ceiling of what all of those companies are offering from a price point standpoint as well. So people want to make sure that they're making the right choice. And when customers look down the spec sheet of these two instruments, they're kind of going to be left wondering, what are the big differences? I mean, there's a few things that pop out, but some people might miss these differences. And so this video is really going to address singularly, without getting into all kinds of other spec comparisons, the musical differences between these two instruments. We've done an extensive individual review of the 99, an extensive individual review of the NV5. So if you're looking for, kind of deep dives into each one of these instruments, I'd suggest go check those out. But if you're, down to these two in your research, or maybe 3 or 4 and these two are up there, and you're really looking for the salient differences between them, that's what we're trying to address in this video right here. From a sound technology standpoint, a sound production standpoint, let's begin there. Both of these instruments use Kawai's latest version of their chipset, their tone generator, called the Harmonic Imaging XL with rendering. Which means that both of these instruments, when they're in acoustic piano mode, are generating this sound with a digital algorithm rather than just drawing from a sample. And this is amongst the first Kawais that do this. Roland has models that does this as well. And on the software side, we've got providers like Modart making their piano tech that have really celebrated and advanced the art of piano modeling technology. So there's modeling happening in here for both of them, and the chipsets aren't any different. Then we move to the speakers, and we see that they have 4 tweeters across the top, 2 dome tweeters, and then we've got the soundboard as well. So both of these instruments actually use a spruce soundboard with transducer magnets on the inside, and that's what's generating the majority of the tonal energy that both of these instruments are putting out. And all of the other speakers are Onkyo provided. The amplifiers are Onkyo provided. And when we get past that, and we're talking about the NV5S, which is the latest release, we have identical interfaces to control these instruments from which also gives us updated wall EQ settings, some updated low dynamic control settings, all sorts of other things that are slightly different than the original NV5. So the differences just keep getting smaller and smaller between these two instruments. So we have a similar array of speakers. The power, the output rated power on these things is both the same. It's about 130, 135 watts. They both have the soundboard. They both have the same tone generating technology. And so the only difference from a sound generating standpoint between these two instruments really is the cabinet. And without playing them side by side, I would be left wondering how big a difference, or any whatsoever, is that cabinet going to make? And getting these side by side in the same room, in the same acoustic environment, miking them up the same, line out the same, all of that, I was genuinely surprised to find out that there is quite a musical difference between them. Now, I have played both extensively, and if you've seen my review of the NV5, you'll know that I'm a really big fan of what Kawai has been able to accomplish there. I consider it to be just one of the most musical digital instruments that I've ever had a chance to touch. But I still really think that the CA99 brings a lot to the table for the price, because there is a price gap here. But when I got them side by side, I really was quite surprised to hear the difference. So I have gone through each of the settings, and these are exactly the same. So wall EQ is off. These are line outs and not the headphone out. So we're not talking about any of the spatial headphone post-signal processing happening here. I've got rich as the sort of preset smart set select on both of these as well, and we're in the SKEX Concert Grand rendering engine. So this is as apples to apples from a signal standpoint as I can possibly get these two instruments. So all of the differences that you are hearing when I play this through the speakers is going to be entirely the result of some other kind of hard-coded cabinet-specific EQing that's happening post signal generation and before it hits the speakers, or the effect of the cabinet itself, because the NV5 does have a taller cabinet, and I think looks like it's about 3 or 4 inches difference between the 99 and the NV5. Now, I've been surprised by cabinet effect before. I did a comparison between the Roland F701 and the RP701, which, again, on paper, have virtually identical speaker and amplifier systems. The only difference is really the cabinetry that those speakers are attached to. And the RP701 really did present a bassier, fuller tone because of how they were able to mate those speakers to the resonating chambers of the cabinet. And so I'm left thinking that the effect we're hearing between these two has to be some kind of a combination of those two things. Some unannounced or unspecified post-processing EQ that's kind of hardwired into this instrument, active crossovers or whatever that might be slightly different than the CA99, and or it's a cabinet difference. So let's hear these now. I'm going to start with the NV5, and I'm going to keep these playing samples fairly short and go back and forth as often as I can, so you can hopefully hear what I'm hearing. So we'll start here. So I'm not sure whether you're hearing this on the other end, but what's coming through abundantly, clearly in person is a much tighter and I would say a better balanced treble out of the NV5. There's just nothing that's hitting the ear that's strident in any way, that's brassy in any way. And for the most part, that's true of the CA99, but there's a much more prominent upper mid-end coming out of these speakers. And when we go down to the bottom of the piano, just a touch of woofiness on the CA99 that's not there on the NV5. So the overall effect, both in the bass and the treble, is that there's something that's just a little smoothed out on the Novus, and it feels like it's a little contained, it's like more sculpted. Or if I was, describing these sounds in a mixing setting, the NV5 sounds mastered, whereas the Novus, whereas the CA99 sounds like it just needs to be run through some sort of a mastering plugin. I should point out that if we're talking about the CA99 in a rosewood finish compared to the Novus 5, we've got several $1,000s difference between these two instruments. So it isn't necessarily going to appeal to the same customer. I mean, the CA99 really works well for somebody who comes into the marketplace thinking, well, I got around $5 to spend. I could go up a little, I could go down a little, but that's kind of the ballpark that I want to be in. And I don't know if I'm looking for an acoustic or a digital, but I've heard some interesting things about what digital pianos are doing recently. I'm going to check it out. I mean, the CA99 is a phenomenal option for a customer who enters the marketplace with that in mind. Because the action, which we are going to get to in a moment, feels more consistent than what you'd get in most used pianos. You've got the low maintenance thing. You've got the, use whatever sound you want. You've got all of the connectivity options, and it sounds great. Comparing these two, I don't want to come off in any way as complaining about what the CA99 has to offer from a sound standpoint. I think if you didn't have the side-by-side comparison, and certainly compared to the majority of other digital pianos in the CA99 range, I think the soundboard and I think the bass response out of this is just absolutely insane. I've never heard the kind of presence in the bass that on a digital piano in this price range before from any other instrument. And I think the quality of the piano tone itself is good enough that you could record with this easily. So lots to like, but when you're in this direct comparison and there's just no shade to hide in, this is just like maximum sunlight on both of these instruments, there does seem to be this difference in finish and in just smoothed, sculpted sound that's leaving the speaker system on the NV5. And so if that's something that's important to you as a customer, that would be my first major musical point of difference between these two instruments. So now we move on to action, which is probably the most obvious difference between these two on paper. And believe me, it's not just on paper, it is in real life as well. So on the CA99, we have the Grand Feel 3. And this is an action with a full-length key stick. It pivots just like an acoustic key. It's got a front rail just like the acoustic key. And it, activates a hammer similar to how it would activate a hammer in a grand piano. It's not exactly the same. It's missing the whole whip-in, double escapement mechanism that actual grand pianos have. And you also get, if you go up to, say, the Novus 10, it has a legit full grand piano action. So this is kind of a scaled down, stripped down version of grand piano action in here. Very durable. They made some needed and welcome changes from the Grand Feel 2 to the Grand Feel 3, notably at the back of the key stick, how that key stick plays against the capstand for like power users of previous generations of the CA98. There was actually slip tape issues. Kawai was very good about fixing this and replacing it and supporting customers through it. We actually wound up using felt, the same kind of felt that actually goes on an acoustic key for the capstand to sit on. And we put that exact felt at the back there. That seemed to solve the problems. They've now re-engineered the back of that key stick. Problem solved. Over on the NV5, we've got a Millennium 3 action straight up. Instead of a hammer, it's kind of got this funky looking futuristic carbon fiber-y thing where a hammer would be, but otherwise, it's pretty much what you'd find dimensionally and geometrically if you looked in, say, a K200. This is more or less got a K200 action in it. And they're optical sensors versus just the physical sensors over here. So there is a substantial difference in the feel of these two pianos. The NV5 is going to feel a little heavier at anything underneath about, I'd say 60%, 50% volume, but probably more like 60% volume. This is going to feel much heavier than this. Once you get both up around the 60% range, there's not a sensation of a difference in weight. It's just a difference in the dynamic resistance of the key. Once this key is in motion, it feels a lot lighter and a lot smoother, whereas on here, you really feel the mechanism just like you do in a piano. Now, for me, that extra sensation of connectedness to the action gives me a greater sense of dynamic control over here, especially when you're playing softly. It really does feel like you're playing an upright piano. And, well, if they've done this right, it should, because we've got an upright action in there. So this is something that, in a perfect world, you would have a chance to try side by side, so you could feel the kinds of differences that I'm sensing. If you don't, if you're in an area where you just can't get to a dealership, and these happen to be two instruments that are on your wish list, this would be my feedback. If you are downgrading from an acoustic upright, or definitely from an acoustic grand, and that acoustic upright was a pretty high quality upright and something that was at least 46 or 47 inches in height. So we're not talking about some little spinet or a little Mason and Riche, apartment-sized piano. We're talking something that was, kind of at a semi-professional or professional level at a pretty good height. The NV5 is going to feel disconcertingly, but in a welcome way, just like an acoustic piano. And I think if you were to play these two side by side, your fingers would quickly tell you that this is what feels familiar and what feels right, and it's going to give you that sense of dynamic control. For people where that's not your past experience, let's say you're upgrading from a lower level instrument. You were started on a Roland HP, or you were on a Yamaha CLP or a YDP or a Kawai, CA or a CN product or something, and this is you're treating yourself or family, you're coming up to something like this. Well, I don't think you're going to perceive that difference as as big of a deal breaker potentially as somebody who's downgrading. I don't doubt that everybody will be able to tell the difference between the feel of the two, but it's whether you would consider one dramatically better versus just two that are equally satisfying, but definitely have some sort of a difference in feel. So that's the difference in feel that we've got between these two. So we've covered, how these speakers are presenting differently, covered how the keys are presenting differently. Are there any other feature differences between these two instruments? Honestly, not really, especially when we get to the NV5S, which is just in the process of being released, because then we have literal copies of the user interface, and all of the control mechanisms between the two is identical, as well as the patch bay, or where all of the ports appear. Your soundboard is the same, and so it really just comes down to a difference in finish. You can get the CA99 in a polished ebony, you can get it in a satin white, you can get it in a satin black and rosewood. So you have the option of getting the CA99 as something that looks a little closer to the NV5, but you're still going to have those critical differences. So I'm going to play several more selections back and forth between these two instruments to really leave you with as useful a comparison as possible for the video. And we certainly hope that you have found this short discussion on the differences between these two instruments really helpful, because I know there are countless forum threads going on CA99 versus NV5. You just have to Google it and you're like, okay, this is a ongoing debate or an ongoing discussion. So once more, let's listen to the NV5, and then we are going to listen to the CA99. So thank you so much for watching, and we really hope that this has added to some useful research materials. If you are out there and considering one of the better digital pianos that the market has to offer, and certainly both of these make the list in my books. These are both definitely top 10s, if not top 5s, in the whole world for any digital piano of any format under 10,000 bucks. If this is the first time that you have found us here on YouTube, we would love for you to subscribe and hit that notification bell because we'd love for you to become part of our community. It is always growing. It's full of people who are very passionate about pianos, playing pianos, owning pianos, really all things pianos. So join the club. We'd love to have you. My name is Stu Harrison. This is Merriam Pianos on YouTube, and we will see you soon for more videos shortly.